And what I can tell you is a secret is that she writes all the time.
Oh.
No matter where she is, I see her with even I don't know if now maybe she's using an iPad, but I've seen her with yellow pads writing. So if you would like to be the world famous author, you must write all the time. That's all I know. And this guy you know. But I do want to tell you that the two of them together are magic. So we are in for a great treat. And in November, after Isabel's new book, The Japanese Lover, one of the best ever, comes out, she's going to be on stage with Don in conversation at Dominican University. And so if you want to come, let me know and I'll make sure I get you a seat. But this is a preview.
Well, I have to say that when I'm traveling, I don't write books. I write to my mother. So it has nothing to do with travel writing. Nothing.
Except you tell her everything you've seen.
So I want to begin by saying, first of all, Isabel, I love you.
Why not? You should marry me. You love me so much.
Oh, okay.
You have to think about it.
I would make a lousy husband, I'm sure.
Well, that's better than nothing.
Okay, so yeah, I win in that competition. No, I mean, Isabel, as you all know, Isabel is an incredible writer. You may not know that she's an even equally incredible human being, just with one of the most warm, open spirits and hearts. And in my acknowledgments to my book, I say, I talk about the treasured writer friends in my life. And I say, equally treasured is the magnificent Isabel Allende, a lusty saint who makes the world a better place with her personality and her prose.
Can I publish that somewhere? Is it on?
Yes.
Everyone's hearing you.
Okay.
You can use that on Match.com. I'll give you a 5-star review. Did they do that on Match.com? TripAdvisor meets Match.com. Okay, here we go.
We met 3 minutes ago and I said, what are we going to talk about, Don? And he said, traveling. I said, I'm a lousy traveler. What are we going to talk about?
I wanted to ask you about packing. Your packing tips.
Oh, I'm really good at that. Really, really good. Thank God I'm very short. So my luggage is minimal. Because my clothes are minimal. I cannot buy anything off the rack. Everything has to be made for my size. And we were walking in and he asks, which side are you? Well, it's obvious that I'm on this side. The question was too much. Yeah. And I travel only with a little suitcase that I can put up there because being so short, I cannot have a big piece of luggage, even if it's a carry-on.
Right.
So I've become an expert.
Okay.
And because I travel a lot, I have everything in little containers ready all the time. So I just dump everything in the suitcase, roll all my clothes, never fold, and that's it.
You are a packing expert.
I am.
I had no idea.
I have had a blog about it. I'm really good.
Wow. Okay. I should have known that. I have a quick request. I forgot to bring my handkerchief out.
And he's sweating
and
all the
I'm really
time.
sweating because when I talk to Isabel, I get really hot.
I've always seen you sweating. I thought it was some problem that you had, right?
It's very to you. So while I'm waiting for my handkerchief, I'm just going to sweat a little bit. The one thing I did really want to make sure that we talked about, can you hear me in the back? Yes. Okay, great. Is the whole idea of sense of place. We're a conference of travel writers and photographers, and we've been talking about storytelling and evoking place, and it's something that, thank you so very much. I have a flute of champagne also. While we're at it. Oh man. Sense of place and how you do that. I mean, one of the many, many amazing gifts that you have is bringing places to life, whether they're contemporary places or long ago places. How do you do that?
Well, I begin with a sense of place and time. I have written several historical novels and other novels that, although they are not historical, they need to have a very solid foundation that is very realistic so that I can build the fiction on very solid ground. And that's research. So I begin, even before I go to a place, I begin with the research. If it's a historical novel, it's harder because I have to imagine how things were at that time. But if it's, I just wrote a contemporary novel that happens here in the Bay Area in 2014. So you would imagine that doesn't require any research for someone who lives here. But the research gave me the book because it started as a flimsy love story, and then I started researching about the Bay Area in this time, and things start to emerge. So I think that once I get that research done, I try to talk to people who are experiencing it. If it's a historical novel, it's very hard to find someone who's still alive, of course, especially if it happened 200 years ago.
Yeah.
But there are letters. People write letters. And instead of finding all the research in history books or geography books or whatever, I go to the letters because letters are personal. And I think that it's the same for you as travelers to talk to people. Talking to people is where you get the wonderful flavor of things. I wrote a novel about the gold rush. And of course there is millions of documents written and textbooks and novels and everything about the gold rush. Well, I went to the letters that the Chilean miners wrote to their families in Chile, and some of them are collected in the Biblioteca Nacional, the National Library. And then I got things like a glass of milk was more expensive than a bottle of champagne.
Wow.
Not because there were no cows, there was no one to milk the cows. Everybody was looking for gold. I mean, that's a jewel. The kind of thing that when traveling or describing a place, you have to find. The unusual, the unexpected, the thing that only a person who lives there would know.
Wow, that's wonderful. So the book really does change course as you do your research. The research.
When I started, I don't know much about the place.
Right.
I may have an inkling of why I want to place my novel in that particular place, but I don't know much. And in the research, I start learning about it, and I fall in love with it. Usually I go also, and then talking to people and reading about it, I become acquainted with it to the point that I can place myself and my characters there.
Do the characters emerge from your research also?
Yes, because the characters, I mean, we are in some way a reflection of the land and the culture in which we live. I have been a foreigner all my life. I don't really belong in a place. So maybe that's why for me it's so important to place my characters in a certain setting that sounds realistic, in which they belong. And that will determine who the character is. If I write a love story placed in the Bay Area among Americans, it would be a different love story from something that I can place in Chile, for example. The Chilean would be much crazier. Yeah, and people would just fall in love at first sight and stuff that doesn't happen here. Here people are so cautious, nobody wants to suffer. Yeah, what kind of love is that?
Exactly.
So the character driven by the land and the culture.
Mhm.
And even in Chile, it's very different, people who live in the coast and people who live in the mountains.
Really?
Of course, it's a different way of seeing the world.
Mm.
If you live in an isolated place or if you live in the middle of the city, that will determine the kind of characters you have,
Right.
if they are young or old.
What are the characteristics of people who live near the water?
I think that in general, at least in Chile, everything happens in the water. In Latin America, if you see, Latin America has the form of an ailing heart. And all the culture, all the life happens in the coasts.
Mhm.
The interior of the country has been explored now, but it wasn't for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Mm.
So the colonizers came to the coasts and they created countries and cultures around the coast. So everything happens where there is water and you can get out. When you are in the mountains, the world is more limited,
Mm.
and you don't see the possibility of another world, of another getting in touch with something else, and that makes people different.
Yeah.
My grandfather was Basque, and he came from a stock of farmers in the Basque country. People who are very limited horizons, very severe, very hard lives. And then he immigrated to Chile, a country that is completely different. And he had a house in the beach, he traveled to Patagonia where he had sheep. So there was an extensive universe for him, but his mind was always the mind of a Basque farmer in the mountains.
Wow.
So because that doesn't change. And I have been all over the world, not all over the world, but in many, many places, traveling most of my life. And when I say I don't have roots, it's because I don't really belong in a place. But the inner roots, the roots that are in the soul, are still Chilean. And I still think like Chilean. I've lived in the United States for 27 years, and I'm still Chilean. And I will always have an accent and look different and think that you're all weird. I don't understand these people. I don't understand Trump.
Oh, well.
What is this? I was talking to a person that is in the audience now, that she's from a part of Oregon, that she says that everybody is into guns and Christ. How can you combine both things? I don't know. And she says that you can hear the church bells and everybody praying and singing, and the people exercising their guns. I mean, shooting.
Right.
So
I like exercising their
try to explain that to abroad.
Yeah, well, indeed. I just came back from Paris, and pretty much all anyone could talk to me about was Trump. Qu'est-ce que c'est que Trump? Pourquoi Trump?
Le Pen.
And exactly what I said. Pourquoi Le Pen, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's so true. It's so true. So if you were a character in an Isabel Allende novel, where would you put yourself, location-wise?
First of all, I would have long legs. I would be beautiful. I would be stunning. I'm smart, of course. I'm very strong and independent. What was the question? With myself.
Yeah, where would you put location? Where would you have yourself be?
In bed with someone. I'm out of the town.
I'm gonna die up here. What kind of a bed? Just
I don't know what kind of a man or a woman. I'm not
Right.
particular about that. That's the question. Who cares about that?
I was scared to go there, but sure, what kind of a man? Or woman? Or the group?
Probably be beautiful, young, smart, like me. Like me, the character in the book.
All right. So you're putting me in your book too, apparently. Wow. Okay. You made me lose my notes. But only my notes.
Okay, this is a class.
This is a very serious conversation we're having. Deep breath. So you're not. So I really was sort of curious where, if you were a character, if you have in mind like a setting in which you would want to be, or where is Northern California sort of the setting for you, or what do you think? Where is this setting?
Well, this is the setting that has been my home for a long time. So I'm here. But as a character in a book, it will depend on the story.
Right.
I will, it will depend on where I want to place the story.
Yeah.
I wrote a book about Haiti 200 years ago. Why would I be interested in that? I don't know. And, well, now I know, but at the time I didn't. And I have to put myself in the place of each one of the characters. I have to become the characters. And so I have to become a character that lives in that place at that awful time of slavery, when the time of the plantation. Why would I do that? But that was a requirement of the book.
Yeah. What is your theory about why and how that book came to you?
It started in a different direction, and then the research made me turn into Haiti. But now I know that that book is about the abuse of power. Slavery is all about power. And at the time, I couldn't make that connection, but now I know that this has been an obsession in my life. The abuse of power and the power to abuse. And the extreme form is, of course, slavery. When you own another human being, you can sell their children, you can kill them with impunity, you can do whatever you want. By the way, what the military did in Chile during the time of the military coup, they even sold children. So that stuff has always been something that obsesses me. And I think that I ended up writing that book because of that. But at the time, I thought I was just writing a particularly fascinating story. I wanted to write about the Pirates of the Caribbean because it was the first truly democratic society. And I thought, wow, this is fascinating to research. And then the movie came out. And I could not improve the movie. So I thought, okay, that idea is gone. But I had already been researching for the pirates in the area of New Orleans because they control the Caribbean. And they had an island, the Grand Ile, in front of New Orleans, which they called Barataria. And that's where they had their settlement of 3,000 people. And they would come, and it was a particularly democratic and egalitarian society in which the captains were voted. And they had power on the ship, but not on land. On land, they lost all their power. Very interesting. So I thought, okay, given that the pirates are not there, but I had already researched about New Orleans, there was in New Orleans at the time, it was the golden age of free people of color. And it was a fantastic culture that had a French flavor. And I thought, well, why the French flavor? Well, it had been a French colony briefly, but people spoke Spanish at the time because it was also a Spanish colony. The real French input came because between 1789 and 1801, 10,000 people escaped from Haiti and settled in New Orleans. And they were French colonizers that were escaping. And I thought, why were these people coming? They were escaping from the French revolt in the plantations. So I started researching the plantations. And then I stumbled upon this fantastic story. So you see, place and time given by the research. I didn't have to invent anything. The story was unbelievable. Now, the problem with that is most of the research was in French, because I wanted to see it from the point of view of the French and the Haitians, and not the Americans, who had a very different perspective on the whole thing. So it was a fascinating experience with time and place.
Yeah. When I travel, I take photographs, and then I come back and I use my photographs to help me reconstruct the place. I guess so the letters are kind of like photographs
Yeah.
for you then when you're doing that.
Yeah, I write to my mother every day. We've been doing this all our lives. I have a closet.
You
full
write
of
to your mother every day?
Every single day. And so I have a closet full of letters that are classified by year in boxes. And right now we are trying to archive all that and put it in digital form, which costs a fortune. I don't know if it's worth it. And so my mother saves my letters and I save her letters, and at the end of the year we put them together. And I don't take pictures because I don't know how to use any technology, let alone a camera. But the letters are wonderful because the letters not only tell about the place and what I'm seeing, but the emotion behind it. So what I feel, what I think, what I dream in that particular place. That's what's more interesting for me at least.
Wow. I would love to read those letters.
You can't. First because they're in Spanish. Yeah. First they're in Spanish, and then they are very, very private, because we tell each other the stuff that we would never say aloud to anybody. Everything is politically incorrect. Everything. Not to mention the stuff we talk about my stepfather. So no one will ever read that.
When did you start doing that?
When I was separated from my mom, I was 15, and she was in Turkey, I was in Chile, and we started writing. At that time, the letters would take like 2 months. So it wasn't a matter of receiving a letter and answering the letter. You wrote every day, and the letters just went. And some day you would receive no letters at all, and other days 6 letters. And so we got that in the habit of writing every day, and we have not written when we live in the same place, which is not often.
What an incredible treasure those letters are.
It is.
Wow.
Because, memory is so selective.
Yeah.
We tend to remember things in a certain way, and probably they didn't happen in that way. It didn't even happen to you in that way. But if you write it on the very day, then when you read it 10 years later, you refresh your memory and say, wow, this was quite different from what I remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
Marriage, for example. Yeah. Yeah, it's different.
It's very different, yeah. Now your new book, what was the genesis for that?
A conversation in the street. I was walking with a friend in the streets in New York, and we were talking about our parents, and I told him about my mother and how she had never been able to marry my stepfather because there was no divorce in Chile, etc. And then she started talking about her mother, who was 81 years old. And she said that for 40 years, she had had a wonderful friend that was a Japanese gardener. And I said, yeah, they were probably lovers. She said, lovers? My mother? No! And nobody thinks that our mothers have sex. Yeah.
Well, they had it once.
And so she said no. But then I started thinking, I don't know why that little seed stayed with me, and I started thinking about that kind of relationship of two people from completely different cultures and at a time in which they had to live. So again, research. And then I started researching the time, and it's the time of the Second World War. And what happened to the Japanese population here, the internment camps? What happened to the Jews that came escaping from the Nazis? So that gives you, again, a rich material to work.
Yeah. What surprised you in the course of your research?
The internment camps a lot. Because, of course, they were not like the concentration camps in Germany. Nobody starved to death. And they were not extermination camps or forced labor. But they are, the correct term is concentration camp. That is what defines the situation in which they were. And what happened to that population? 2/3 of the people who went to the internment camps were American citizens, children of Japanese but born here. And one thing that surprised me extremely was that many volunteered for the war. And they went into, I think it was the 442 Regiment, the most decorated regiment in the military history of the United States. And they were all Japanese boys that were fighting for the United States while their families were in concentration camps. So that is surprising.
I just got goosebumps. That's amazing. Yeah. How do you, what was the biggest challenge in putting the book together, would you say, in writing the book, bringing characters to life?
I didn't have many challenges because people who have read the reader's copy say that the book flows, and I didn't have a plan. I just sat down and wrote without a plan, thinking of the characters and what would happen, and then I would have to go back and explain something that had happened before, and then move it together with something else. I didn't have a real challenge.
Wow. Is that true for most of your books?
No.
Oh.
It happened with this book.
And
It should cost less.
So, when you sit down, so for this book, you sat down and you just let the story kind of flow, and it took its own course as you were doing the book.
And the book starts in a retirement home, and I had the model, the Redwoods. So I named it differently, but I went and I researched and I stayed there with people and I talked to people. And then the place came alive to me, and it was very easy to write the book because I had the place.
It seems to me that it takes extraordinary trust in yourself to just let that process unfurl like that and not try to control it.
I'm old enough to trust myself. And I've written 22 books.
Yeah.
So I know that I can tell a story, sometimes with more effort, but I have learned to relax and trust that if I have time to research and time to write, I will be able to tell the story, as long as it's not, of course, about sports. But if it's about normal stuff, I can write.
When did that, in your career, when did that transition happen, or were you always confident in your storytelling?
No. I would say 10 years ago.
Really?
I started to trust, but when I had written many books already. But I always thought at the beginning that each book is like a gift that sort of falls from heaven or something, like an apple. And it has its own rules and its own demands. And I'm not in charge, and I don't control it, and I don't control my own inspiration. I can only control my work, how many hours a day I'm going to work, and how I'm going to correct until I'm fed up with it. Somebody said that you never finish a book, you just give up. And if you are, like me, obsessed with correction, that's true. There is a point when you say, okay, done, I just can't do it anymore. But around 10 years ago, and this has to do with a spiritual process, I started working with a teacher, with Walter Link, and we started working on the spiritual process and knowing myself better and trusting what I have inside in many ways, not only for writing but in life. And that helped me slowly to trust the process and not be too attached to the outcome. To say, okay, this is the best I can do. I put it out there like an offering. If it's accepted, fine, and if it isn't, well, what can I do? I've done my best. And that's great, because now I can relax and I feel happier when I write. I'm not so stressed.
No, that's beautiful. I think that's just an incredibly powerful message. You do your very, very best.
Yeah,
you put all your
trust
best
that-
into it, and you're just, that's it. I've done my best.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the boat sails off. That's great, though.
But of course there are techniques. In the process you learn a lot of stuff. And in travel writing, I think that the most important thing is that you lie a lot.
You lie a lot.
You lie a lot. You make up stories because not always you will find the fantastic story of the Arab stud that comes and kidnaps you and but you can make it up.
So Twitter just alit. Isabel Allende, when you write travel, lie.
I mean, you don't lie about the place and the time. I believe it. But then, if nothing happens to you, you are in Florence, and you are not approached by an Italian, and nothing happens, and the spaghetti is awful. Who's checking? Who you wrong? Nobody. It's your own experience. No one can prove
That's
it.
right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's what I say in my travel writing book. Just lie.
You don't say it because you make a living with that. I don't.
Right?
But you do it. I know you
Maybe once, but no. Can you talk a little bit about your actual writing process? Did your book begin on the sacred day when you begin all your books?
I begin my books on January 8th out of discipline now. It was superstition at the beginning, but now I need to organize my life. And writing is like falling in love, full commitment. So I have to think when in my life I have the space and the silence to do it. And having a day to begin gives me that chunk of time that I need. So I do begin that day. And the process is simple. The first 2 weeks are awful because I have an idea of the place and the time, but I don't have the story. I don't have the characters, and I show up every day and I try to work, and sometimes nothing happens. For 2-3 weeks I throw away everything because it doesn't have the tone. Once I was with Amy Tan, we were trying hats. And yeah, we were trying hats in some consignment place. And she was putting on a hat and she said, it's all about the tone. And I thought, wow, she's speaking about literature. When you get the tone in which you're going to tell a particular story, and it varies from one story to the other, you are in. It's like you pick up the rhythm of dancing. I'm a terrible dancer, but when I pick up the rhythm, I can follow more or less. If I don't pick it up, it's impossible. So I think that happens with writing, that there's a rhythm, there's a tone, and then you start like galloping, and then you're in. And then things happen, the characters talk to you, the story develops, you get ideas, you start dreaming about the story, you can get it out of your head, and then you wake up in the middle of the night and take notes because it's obsessing you.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's like falling in love.
Yeah.
So beware.
Right. It sounds to me like it's almost a sacred process for you. I mean, you're sort of opening yourself up and to receive.
No, not sacred, but organic.
Yeah.
In the sense that I control very little. I control the information, but the rest sort of comes with the doing, with the process. We were talking about storytelling a minute ago, and I was telling Don that I feel that storytelling is very much like music. Everybody can learn to sing or play an instrument, but some people have an ear for music and some people don't. And with storytelling, I think you can learn to write and tell a story correctly, but the sense of the story, of the storytelling, I think you're born with it mostly. And I have taught writing a few times in my life, and you have, let's say, 20 students. And one among the 20 students has that. That person knows what's the highlight and holds it. How to create suspense, how to work with the reader, with the reader's imagination to pull him in or her in. And some people just tell the story, and the story is well told, but it doesn't engage you to the point that you can't stop reading, that you are obsessed, that you love it, that you are one of the characters, that you want something to happen, and when it doesn't happen, you are terribly disappointed. I remember when I wrote a crime novel, at the end, one of the protagonists, probably one of the main characters, dies. And he had to die. And I got innumerable letters of people who were very angry at me because I had killed the character. And I said, well, I didn't have a choice. The alternative would have been to kill the dog. I couldn't do that. So things happen. That's the great part about storytelling, when you are not really in control and you let it happen.
Did the character know he was going to die?
Of course not. Of course not. He was betrayed by me.
But he's in your head, right? Did he continue to be in your head after you killed him?
No. After I kill them, they are gone. They are gone. After I finish the book, everybody's gone too.
Oh, really?
So, for example, one character that always dies is the beautiful woman. She dies before page 60. And I just hate that person. So she dies, not always in a horrible way, but she does die. And sometimes I try to save her, and she drags on for 10 more pages. No, from the beginning.
So they really disappear, the characters?
After the book is done, I will do something else.
They don't come back to you later
They come
on?
back in costume. For example, I have an Arab merchant with a hair lip in Ibaruna. And that sort of father figure, that is not the father, comes back in many of my books. And now he comes back in the form of a grandfather. But it's the same character, with different costumes and names and circumstances. And I recognize him.
Right. He comes back and you say, oh, hi, you're back.
Hi, you're back. Yeah.
But you don't know from the beginning, when you sat down to actually write the book, you didn't know he was going to come back.
No.
He just inserted himself.
Yeah. I wrote a book called Maya's Notebook,
Yeah.
and I have a grandfather there. And that book needed a lot of research for traveling.
Yeah.
All the Chiloé.
Yeah. And you went there.
Not to mention Las Vegas. What?
You went there.
Of course,
Yeah.
many times.
Right.
Many times.
That's a beautiful book. I mean, they're all beautiful books. But
Thank you. But in that book, I have this grandfather that I'm always inventing a grandfather that is not like mine. I love my grandfather, but I would like to have had in my life someone who loved me unconditionally. Someone who would think that I was wonderful and celebrate everything I did. Forget it. That doesn't happen in Chile. No. We don't spoil the children in Chile. And so I wanted that, and I created that character. And then again, he comes back in Ripper, and then there's a character similar in the new book. So I see that I'm beginning to create a person that is so real that can be the grandfather I didn't have. And so now, in a way, maybe he's with me. In a sense, I have to do that with a lover.
Okay. I can't wait to read that book.
I wouldn't want a Japanese guy though. I would like someone that I can speak the language.
Right.
But you have a Japanese lover.
I do. How do I do it? How much time do we have?
About the language part.
Oh, that. I'm fluent.
In Japanese?
Pretty much.
Wow. They say that you learn languages in bed. A lot of times.
I'm still studying.
You are not yet a retired heterosexual.
So maybe it's time to open the I could go on talking to you forever, and I will, but let's give the audience a chance to ask some questions. Yeah.
I have a question about how you capture the ideas that the muse when it pops up. What do you do?
I don't know. It's like, it's not, I don't control that. As I said before, this woman walking in the streets in New York planted a little seed. Why that seed became a book and not other many ideas that I might have, I don't know. It stays. When something stays and comes back, and you start walking around it in the periphery and trying to find more about it, and you are interested, that's the story that you will write. And other stories are fantastic, and you don't spend much time in the story. People are very kind, and I get lots of emails all the time. People who don't like me don't write to me. People who like me do. They take the trouble to write to me. And many people offer me their lives. They say, you are a writer and I'm not, and I have had a fascinating life. This is what happened to me. And then they tell me a story. And the story can be wonderful and rich and in an extraordinary place. And it doesn't catch my imagination. The other day, I got an email from a 16-year-old girl in Honduras. And she said that she lives with her grandparents. The whole family lives in a sort of compound, everybody together. And she said that the grandfather is the patriarch, very authoritarian, very male chauvinistic, conservative, Catholic, like a man from the 1900s. And she said, my grandmother apparently is the submissive wife. And when he goes to work, she changes her clothes, puts on her stockings, and goes out to work. And she has been working for 20 years in whatever thing she's working, and he doesn't know. And I think that there's more to this. I think that he pretends not to know because it's a matter of pride. I have no idea. But you know, that's a seed that I can hold on to. Because the deception, the complicity, the extraordinary grandmother that is still working at 70 without the husband knowing. And the 16-year-old who is watching all this. And the fact that the whole family knows that the grandmother goes out to work and nobody has said a word in a compound.
Right.
How can that happen?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of story that I can grab and I can research it and enrich it and think of each one of the people who live in that house. Why that one and not another one? Because that's the kind of stuff I would do if I was in that woman's position. If I had a husband like that at that time in Honduras, of course I would do the same. So I can relate to that.
A quick, just follow-up question from me. So have you ever started a book that didn't work?
No.
No. Every time.
Once I decide that this is the story, I work. And I know that sometimes, I already know that it might take a month before the story shapes up, before I can grab it and see what the core of it is. But I keep doing it, I keep doing it with the certainty that if I show up enough times, it will happen.
Wow.
There's a question there.
Yeah, I also wanted to follow up. I've been wondering throughout this talk, I'm going to try and speak loud enough so you can hear me. I've been wondering throughout this talk, you do so much research and you're so based in place and time and real people, but you write fiction. And even just now we were talking about how these people have inspired you, and so why fiction based on real things?
Why do I write fiction? I have also written memoirs, and my family gets very angry. So it's much easier to write fiction because who's going to confront you with fiction? But also, fiction gives me a freedom that non-fiction doesn't. Non-fiction is you have to be as objective and realistic as possible. I'm not objective in my life as a person. How could I be in my writing? And when I have written a memoir or I have written non-fiction, I know that in a form, in a way, it is fiction, because it's me who chooses what to say and what to omit. What adjectives am I going to use in this particular paragraph? So I create the highlights and the lowlights, and I create the suspense, or whatever I create. It's my point of view. So I do understand that the family gets angry, because it's not the story that each one of them has, is it?
Right. Yeah.
You said you start your novels on January 8th, and on an average, how many months or years does it take for you to write one?
Sometimes the research takes a long time, but the writing is usually very quick. In, let's say, 4 or 5 months, I have a draft, a first draft.
Mm.
And then with that first draft, I print it for the first time. I do correct on the screen many, many times. But when I feel that the story, that I have told the story, I print it. And when I read it on paper for the first time, I know what the story is about and what it is too much, what is missing, what part of the research I need to fill in, etc. And then the editing begins. And that can take the rest of the year. But on average, I have written a book every 18 months because I have written 22 books in 33 years. So that's more or less,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My math is not that good, more or less.
Wow, that's. And do you have an editor before your real editor?
No,
Yeah,
I don't have an editor before or after. Because I write in Spanish and I send my books to my agent and she sends it to the editors. And my editor in the United States could not read Spanish until recently. Now I have an editor who can read Spanish, but we have not worked together editing the book. She got a book that was already published in Spain.
Right.
And in Spain there is no tradition of working, that I know of working intimately with an editor that will tell you, that will guide you. We don't have that. So I'm alone.
Wow.
By the time I get the first reviews, it's too late. Yeah. What can you do? Yes.
One of my favorite books of the last few years that I read was The Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolaño from Chile. And I was just wondering if you've read his
Yes.
stuff and what you think of.
What's the author?
Bolaños, Alfonso Bolaños. Alfonso Bolaños said of me that I was no writer, that I was a narrator, whatever. No, escribidora or something like that. Okay, he hated my writing, but he had never read it. And I do like his writing, and I have read it. He's a good writer. I think that there has been a lot of interest in him as a writer in many languages. He's a very important writer. He was a terrible man. Horrible. He never said anything good about anybody. I'm glad he's dead.
Have you ever recognized a character in your books as you? And if so, how do you let go and allow things to happen to that character?
I think that the author is in every character. Why do you choose that character in particular to write about? Why do the characters say those things? It's you talking. It's you in every character. I can be the torturer, and I can be the courtesan, I can be the grandfather and the granddaughter. If I cannot be the character, then it won't be real. It won't be three-dimensional. It will be flat. But I have to get myself in the character and be the character. Now, what happens to the character is, sometimes I don't even decide it. As I don't decide much about my own life, I observe my own life, and now I'm 73. I look good for my age, don't I? Takes a lot of yeah, I wake up in the morning and I don't recognize myself. Before I put on the makeup and all that. What are we talking about? I have to be the character, and in my own life now, at this point, I'm looking back at what has happened in my life. What have been the really important things, not the fluff. And I realized that I didn't have any control. The fact that my father abandoned me when I was 3 determined my view of the world and my view of myself, probably. Then we had the military coup and forced me into exile. My life changed completely. I had to leave everything behind and start from scratch. Then I fell in love with Willie and came to live in the United States and start from scratch again. And so the things that have happened to me have been determined by life, by destiny, by God, by whatever. So what I have learned is to relax into that place in which you are not in control. Okay, we'll see. We'll manage day by day. And I think the characters do the same. I start with a character and I don't know what's going to happen, who the character will encounter in a certain point, how the destiny is going to turn completely. One thing, for example, that happens to me a lot, it did happen more before than now, but I would have the devil lover in every book. The devil lover is the kind of guy that any woman would like to have at least for a few days. The kind of guy that is so sexy. He's usually a gorilla or yeah, he's in danger, he's dangerous, he's attractive, and whatever. Well, I know that he has to die, or he has to go away, disappear, because no one wants to stay with that person. That person is fine for a little bit, but who wants to stay? And so if I don't want to stay, why would my character want to stay with him? So that the character doesn't know, and I don't know yet, because I'm always trying to make it work. It's not going to work. The guy is going to die. So that's life. That's right.
Isabel, if memory serves, you started, or early in your writing career, you were a journalist, and I'm wondering if that in any way set a foundation for your writing life, and if you made stuff up at that time.
I think that being a journalist was a fantastic school. First of all, it teaches you to use language properly, to make language efficient. You don't have much time, and you don't have much space. And so you have to really be very precise and use language in the most effective possible way. Then it teaches you to research and to take from the interviewer whatever you need and be persistent. All that is really important, to work with a deadline. As a writer, I don't have a deadline, but I give myself deadlines, because otherwise I would be procrastinating forever. As a journalist, I was a lousy journalist. And I'm glad that I'm a writer now, because I lied all the time, but I was never caught. But I worked in a magazine, and I became quite famous at a certain point in Chile, because I wrote an article that was a scandal in Chile at the time. This was 1968. And Chile in 1968 was like the United States in 1860. So we were so backward, and a very conservative, socially conservative society, and very Catholic. And I wrote an interview to an unfaithful woman. And I promise that it was true, that I did interview her, and whatever she said, I wrote it down. Nobody ever believed me that I had not made it up, because I had the reputation of being too imaginative, probably, and the director of the magazine said, she said, who is the woman? And I said, I can't tell you because I promised. I was in Chile a month ago, and my friend, who is now retired, the director, said, will you tell me now who was it? And I said, she's still alive. Wow. She's 94 and she's still alive. As soon as she dies, I'll tell you. Because it was true. That's the only true thing that I've written. Let me explain. Interviews have to be true, because there's another person there that can prove you wrong. Right. Yeah, in that case, you have to be careful as a journalist. Okay. But the rest, in statistics, you can make them up. And make them work for you, because that's very vague. I have a brother. I have a wonderful brother who is exactly the opposite of me. Very cautious, very prudent. He has a little life. He doesn't want any noise. He's an intellectual. He studies all the time. He's a professor of political science at a university in Atlanta. He just retired like a month ago. And he tried by all means that I would not be invited to his university. Never. But the university was trying to invite me every year, and he would stop it somehow. And he would tell me all the time that I shouldn't go, that for this reason or that reason. Well, one day I just couldn't say no any longer. I had already refused like 15 times, so I went. And my brother Juan was horrified at the idea that I would show up. And so there was a room, an auditorium full of people, and my brother was sitting on a chair at the door, ready to escape. And he was like this while I was speaking. And when we finished, he said, "Where did you get those statistics?" And I said, "I made them up." "You made them up? This was all on videotape. This is going to the library. The students are going to study you." And I said, "Bet you that no one will ever check." To this day, every year I ask him, "Did anybody check?" Nobody. And this is a university. So that gives you some.
I'm learning so much about writing. Wow. Whole new perspective. Let's see, one more question, I think, yeah.
Isabel, you have so many incredible, just captivating books. Do you have any that you've written that are particularly favorite of yours, or a particular labor of love, or do you love them equally like children?
I don't love them particularly, and I don't love my children much. But I know the book that the readers love the most, and that's Paula. That's the book that everybody relates to, and I get more emails about that than anything else. So I think that's the book that was written with tears. It was so raw that people connect to that as a form of honesty, I assume.
Yeah.
And that was not fiction, unfortunately.
Was that the most painful book to write, would you say?
No, it was. I think it was healing to write it. The experience was terribly painful.
Yeah.
But I cried during the whole process of writing, and it was so healing.
Uh-huh.
It was wonderful.
Wow. Right. So I'm sorry it's 2:00 and we could go on talking with you forever.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you one more question though.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to ask
Make
you
it very personal.
Okay. I'm going to ask you two questions because there was one that occurred.
No, one question. You said.
All right, it's a two-part question. The first part is, what's home for you?
Home is where love is.
Mm.
Is where love is. And at this point in my life, I don't have a home.
You have a home here.
We love
Thank you.
And as I know, you're loved by people all around the world. But I know what you mean. But I hope that's of something to you,
Thank
solace to
you.
you.
Yes, it is. It is.
The second part of the one question is, what's the purpose of writing for you?
For me, I don't know, it's automatic. I can't imagine my life without writing to my mother, without writing what I see, what is important to me, what I try to find, to explore. The only way I can do it is writing. Other people can do it in other forms, but how do you exorcise pain? How do you find out who you are? How do you fight against bad memory to preserve what you want to preserve in life? And that memory blurs everything if you don't write it down. So the purpose, I don't know what the purpose is, but I suppose that coming from journalism, it is to communicate. Because I don't write for myself. This teacher that I have, Walter Lane, is always saying, you have to write every day your feelings. You have to write about yourself. I can't do that. I cannot write to myself. I need to communicate. I write to my mother. And my mother is 95. She will be gone soon, I assume, unfortunately. And whom am I going to write to in Spanish with an open heart and with no with no inhibitions of any kind. I don't know, but that's what writing is all about, communicating. Telling someone, one reader, this is what I believe, this is who I am, let's share the story.
You're amazing. I'm kidding.